It's my pleasure to introduce Vladimir Grablev. His award-winning images have appeared in regional outdoor magazines, internet publications, and newspapers, including Arlington Magazine, Around Reston Magazine, and the Richmond Times-Dispatch. His photographs have been exhibited in local and international galleries, business venues, and private collections. He's currently exhibiting in the Brambleton Library until the end of April, and in May and June he will be exhibiting at Rust's Library if you want to take a look at his work. When he's not taking photographs, Vladimir is a professional software engineer. So welcome back, Vladimir.
Thank you, Lorraine. Okay, let's get started now for real. So we were talking about local adjustments right before the meeting, and I would like to quickly cover what we're going to discuss today and what we're going to learn. First, we will talk about local adjustments. What are they and why do we need them? And then once we cover that, we'll quickly jump into the develop module of Lightroom Classic and start applying our first local adjustments. So we will be doing some real work here. We'll learn the concept of masks and keep editing our image, learn what density and flow are, what are those mysterious things that people sometimes get confused about. Learn some smart tools of Lightroom Classic that were recently introduced into the software. And at the end, I'll show some examples of images and how you can creatively use these local adjustments, and share some tips about how to keep your images nice and organized in case you want to come back to them and edit existing adjustments or add new ones. So that's the plan for the next hour. And let's jump into our primary subject. What are local adjustments? Well, it's not a new concept. It is with photography world for more than a century. As an example, I put here an image, a famous image of Audrey Hepburn. And what you see on the right is the final print that was produced from a negative. And when it was developed in the darkroom, the printer was given a set of instructions, what to do with the negative, how to manipulate the light to produce this final result. And you can see that there are a lot of different changes here to the original negative. And negative is kind of not that beautiful as we have the image, the final result. And this is the reality of photography. What we capture with our cameras is often not what we perceive with our mind, because we see beautiful light or we see beautiful subject, but then when we take pictures, we look at the back of our camera or we bring them back at our computers, and they are not that exciting. The light may be not favorable, the color balance is not what we saw there, or maybe the subject is not that appealing to us on the screen compared to what we experienced when we were there, when we pushed the button. And this is the case here. So look at the composition. Look how shifted the face is toward the edge of the frame. And you might think that this is not how you do portraits, because portraits are supposed to show the subject and it should be well balanced. It should not be pushed toward the edge of the frame. But if you look at the final image, you will see that the instructions said that you need to show this reflection, this person looking at Audrey. And this completely changes the idea of the photograph. You now have not only one primary subject, but you have a supportive subject here in the lower corner. And now the photograph is completely balanced. But if you will print it like it was captured, like it was reflected on the negative, the person is barely visible here. And you have to do certain changes to the print in order to show your idea, what you actually saw there. And this is the idea of local adjustments. You take part of the image and you do certain manipulations in terms of light, color, texture, or something to show what you meant when you actually took that picture. Sometimes it's about mitigating certain issues that were there when you captured the image. Like, for example, the light was very, very blue because you were standing in a shadow of some building or mountain or forest, and the only light was blue sky. And because of that, everything around was blue. And if you photograph something in these conditions, you have really heavy blue cast on everything, and images look terrible. And we'll show that in a second. So this is the purpose of local adjustments. It's not just about faking the image or making something artificial. It's actually bringing the image to life and making more natural. So let's try and see how it looks in real life. So here's the image that we're going to work with. Let me collapse this little block. So this is Lightroom Classic, and we are in the develop module, looking at the image as I captured it being on location. It was clear morning, blue sky. I had no clouds, nothing. It was just like this little river with a lot of rocks, with beautiful tree changing the color. But look at the image. It's very, very blue because the only available light was from the blue sky above me. There was no any other source of light that would change this. And I have to fix this. Usually you have this white balance tool and you can auto correct this. Click on the auto button and it will check the overall cast of the image. The Lightroom will do this for you and it will remove the blue cast. But it's still not that appealing to me because now the water is definitely white and the blue is gone, but I know that I was standing in the shadow. So I want to show that I was standing there, but not that much as Lightroom think it should be removed. So I'm usually going I would say manual route. I just take the slider and start doing my changes manually, changing the temperature not exactly as Lightroom would do that, but leaving a little bit of blue just to give people some hint that this is the shadow. This is not uh, it's not a sunset, it's not a sunrise, there is no reflected light that will give us golden glow, that it's truly something in the blue light, but not that much. And to compensate that a little bit with green tint, I'm pushing a little bit of magenta. So, and that's the change. And look at the difference. So this is what we have with just two little sliders. And here's what it was before. So instead of blue, we have this much better balanced image. Now, I see that it's a little bit darker. And of course, when I was standing there, I saw much more details in trees and in rocks. So it's definitely underexposed. It's a little bit darker, so I'll push it just a little bit to make it brighter and show all the details that I wanted to see. The tree in the background and the rock, they are in opposite corners of the image, and this is what I want to show people. The flow from the tree through the water and to this rock in the foreground. And this is what I have as my bright path. I want to remove a little bit of the contrast because again, with open shadow, you have a lot of dark areas that receive very little light. And because of that, the overall image would be very contrasty. We'll fix this a little bit later with masks, and this is okay for now. So it's actually beneficial to start with a little bit less contrasty image when you're going to process them with local adjustments. What I want to do is to show a little bit of color here, especially these yellow and orange and gold colors. So I will increase the saturation just a little bit, like so. But you see that I immediately start seeing this bright green in the foliage, which is not just natural. It was not like that. I don't remember this green being so bright. So I will push my vibrance a little bit down and notice that it will take off a little bit of green and it will remain bright in these highlighted areas. So this is where I want things to go. And now when I look at this, I see that it's nice, but it's a little bit flat. So it has no depth. And what I see in front of the image is essentially the same tonality as what I see in the back of the image. So I'm not sure exactly where I'm looking. And therefore, I can tell you that people will not be able to tell what exactly I want to show them. And to fix that, we will do one simple, basic local adjustment that is so powerful that I'm using this maybe 90% of the time on images like that. And even with open skies, on flat surfaces, on flat areas like clear sky, it's more visible and I'm trying to avoid that. But here it's just amazing. It's called post-crop vignetting. And what it does, it darkens corner of the images, all four of them, toward the center. And you see immediately how different the image is. And if you look at the picture, you already start to see our path. So we have our bright tree, we have white water, and we have rock in the foreground. And these corners are dimmed a little bit. They are darker, so our eyes are not so attracted to these areas that basically just support the image instead of serving as a primary subject. And this tool, just one slider, is making huge impact on your photographs. And you're not changing the image, it's still very natural. There are several sliders that would allow you to change the perception of the vignette. Midpoint allows you to move it inside and out. Roundness, well, I'll touch it a second later, but first of all, I want to show the feather. Feather controls the transition between the area that we want to darken versus the area that we want to keep as it is, the original one. And let me increase the amount. So that's the full amount of the darkening. So now it's very bright. So it's like a frame. And midpoint would allow me to move it out or move it in, or just keep it very close to the corners. You definitely don't want to have that. And you want to have it somewhere in the middle, depending on your subject. Roundness allows you to push borders of this frame, and instead of making it ellipse, make it more like a frame and push it toward edges of the image. If you pull it all the way to another way, you will have it in the center. So you can create images like this. Again, a creative tool, but most of the time I'm using roundness to 0, so I'm not touching that. Adjusting my midpoint according to the subject and using just slightly darkened vignette here with feathering maybe around like 80% or even 100%. So this is just light change, just few sliders, and we have big impact and big change in the image itself. Now, you can use this tool not only to darken corners, but to go creative and, for example, push the amount not to the minus, but to the plus. Reduce the feather and midpoint and change the roundness. And now you suddenly have a frame for your picture. So if you want to exhibit it, or you want to print it, or you want to publish it, you might want to be more unique or creative, or show people that you not just printed the image as it was from the camera, but you paid certain attention to the functionality. So this is what you can do with the vignetting, but this is the limitation of the function. You cannot do that at the same time when you have the vignetting and darkening of the corners. So how you can fix that? Well, for that, we'll use more advanced tools, which are called masks. And this is where we are going toward the functionality and features that we use basically all the time. So I will click on this box here, on this little button, and in this little box with new tools, I will click on radial gradient. And with that, I have ability to create this red circle, which is movable, and red area is highlighting those fragments of the image that I want to change. But I don't want to change the center, I want to change corners. And in order to do that, I'm inverting the image. I'm sorry, inverting the mask. And now look at this. We selected corners of the image exactly the same way as we did that with our vignetting tool. Now, if I'll push the exposure a little bit to the left and start darkening corners, you see that we have exactly the same effect that we had with vignetting, but now it's movable. I can move it up, down, and using these control points, I can increase the circle that will be left unaffected, or I can even turn it a little bit sideways and move it so it will be more aligned with my idea, what I want to show on the image. Now, if I turn this off and go down and turn on my effects back, now I have my image and I have my darkening in corners. So I have much more appealing image with a finish that will show that I really care about my work, and it will be nicely presented if I want to share it or publish somewhere. But this is just one step toward the final result. What I still don't like is that this water is kind of a like white blob. There is nothing interesting happening here. I see no textures, and I really want to show the movement of water and give people sense of something that was fresh and something that is interesting. So it's not just like white spot here. Let me just zoom in so you see a little bit better. What I'm going to do, I'm going to create new masks. So we already have one in this panel that popped up here when we created the first mask. And notice that I don't have any buttons here to create new ones, but instead, this functionality moved to this plus button, and now my menu shows me again the same block with these tools that I had before. But now I'm going to select brush, which creates this circle. And what I can do, I can basically click somewhere and it will highlight the area. And if I click somewhere and drag it, it will start selecting this area. And here we need to stop a little bit, and I need to explain two important tools for the brush, because most of the time you're going to use them, and understanding of this tool is very important. For that, let me switch to the blank page and select this brush once again. So this is our brush, and this is basic and default selection. Note that we have the size, and we can change the size of this brush and select more, or we can select less. So we can do very fine selections. If I want, I can scroll my mouse wheel up and down, and it will change the size of the shape, the size of the brush, so I don't have to come back to the menu all the time. However, there is a second circle that is responsible for the feather. And feather is something that could be adjusted only through the slider, or well, maybe there is a button there, but I'm not touching these buttons because learning them is not that efficient. I'm more focused on my process rather than on remembering keys. So feather is controlled here, but most of the time I keep it to 100%. I want these edges to be really, really soft to soften these transitions between my locally adjusted areas and those that I don't want to touch. And one important slider is density. So right now it's set to 100, and every time I select something, it selects everything as it did with vignette and as it did with radial selection. So whatever is red is selected. Then we have soft transition, like semi-selected, and gradually our mask is fading off to areas that will not be touched with any of the changes. Density, if I'll push it, let's say to 66, if I click somewhere, it will be more translucent. You can see that because now it's not applying 100% of density to the mask everywhere. It is 66, so it is transparent everywhere. So it's like feathering the entire mask. And this helps to reduce the effect of our changes and use all the sliders, all the changes that we're going to use in less pronounced way. So it will be more gradual and we will have more control. So density is our limiter. If I push it to 75, and this is usually where I keep things, that means that no matter how many times or where I will be selecting, it will be always a little bit transparent and I will have a little bit more flexibility in terms of selecting areas. But every time I brush somewhere, it is 75% of the density. It is constant. But if I take flow and put it, let's say, at 50 and start brushing, you see that it's really, really faint. And the reason for that is that now I'm applying sort of a pressure on my brush. And instead of having all the density, all the available density in one stroke, I apply just a portion of it. And it's not like 50%. It's, I don't know, it's more complex algorithm. But if you keep brushing, you will see that your changes are accumulating. I never pay attention to actual numbers here and more follow to the speed how these changes are building up on top of each other. This is how I usually select everything in my image. So I set flow to somewhere around 50 and density around 75. And this allows me to gradually select portions of the image. And with these changes, I know that every time I'm going to reduce the light, it will not be that pronounced. So this is our 100% selection here in the beginning. And here we have less density and therefore it's less visible. And here where I brush just several times, it's barely noticeable. And that's what I want to do. I want to have a lot of flexibility in terms of adjusting minor and really gentle changes in the image. I don't want to exaggerate deep shadows because they're already deep. I don't want to blow up highlights. I want to move these sliders a lot to have a lot of fine adjustment and do slight changes in the actual image. So density and flow are our two important tools. Flow is our pressure, density is our limiter, how much of the mask will be applied to the final selection, no matter how many times we stroke over the same spot. Okay, now let's return to the image and I will repeat this mask selection again. First of all, I will delete this hard selection here. So I will delete this mask and I will create new one with brush. and start selecting this water here, slowly trying to go over areas once where I want just slight changes, and maybe going several times on areas that I want to affect a little bit more. Something like this. And I will select water here. And a little bit here in the corner. And I can be sloppy. It doesn't have to be precise. I can go over edges somewhere. It is not that important because, again, my changes will be so minor. They will be barely noticeable even on the water itself, not to mention rocks where we have feathering already. And now when I have water selected, what I want to do is to push the exposure just a little bit down, increase the contrast, and maybe add some texture to the water and add clarity. And you can see that it's more visible now. Now we have more texture in the moving water. It is not that bright. A little bit more. And now, even if you don't see any differences, let me just turn the mask off. This was before the mask, and this is after. Again, this is a slight difference between before and after, and you barely see any changes while I was doing that. But now the image is much better. When you're going to look at the image, you are going to spend more time like looking at these patterns and looking at the moving of the water. So it's much more interesting. Okay, now let's zoom out and look at our image. So there's our change to the water. Now, what I want to do is to make changes to my shadows. The image is still flat. So what I want to do is to make sure that these shadow areas are definitely shadows because I saw them in 3 dimensions. And I remember this rock was kind of like more circular shape. And this one was a little bit more jagged. So this face was actually like more vertical. And here it looks a little bit flat and more aligned with the top surface. So what I want to do is to create another brush. And again, I will maybe select it a little bit more flow and a little bit more density. And I will start painting over this area here, over this area here, here. And I will make my brush smaller and I go over rocks here just a little bit. Like so. And again, I will use my exposure. I'm not going to change much about the image. I'm just going to push it a little bit down. And notice that I'm going really, really far. I'm already like at -2.5, and you barely see the difference in these rocks. And this is just because my mask is so thin and so light that I'm doing a lot of changes in a slider, but I'm still affecting the image just a little bit. And all the changes are not that apparent. Okay, and this is my rock shadows. Now, let's take a look at lights because we have shadows and now we should have lights. I will create another layer. Oh, I'm sorry. Again, brush. And now I will select highlights, those areas that I definitely enjoyed a lot when was there. So I really like this rock and these textures. They were like marble or something. They were just so beautiful. And this rock was a little bit glowing. I don't know, it was so nice and so warm. So I really, really like this rock. And this is why it's basically just in front of the entire composition because it's so beautiful. But on the picture, it's just flat. So I'm going to fix that, and I'm going to draw your attention by increasing the exposure just slightly and increasing the contrast. And maybe I will make them a little bit warmer because this rock in front of the image was just so orange. This rusty color was just popping up, and here it's just a little bit flat. So now I have 4 masks, and this is the image. So you might think that we did these changes and nothing really changed. But let me turn off these masks, and you will see the difference. So this is before, and we have nice but a little bit flat image. And this is after, and we have image with depth, we have image with focus, and we have image with something that we can look at for a long time and something that we can enjoy for many, many years, even printed on the wall, because now it's something worthy. But there is one thing that I still want to do, and this is about this tree and foliage in the background, because it was autumn, it was beautiful, and I really, really enjoyed that color. But now it's kind of a little bit dark, and I want to make it a little bit brighter and pop it a little bit on the green background. I can do this with brush, but because of all these tiny spots, this foliage is really difficult to select. Fortunately, inside our masks, we have color range selection, and this is where the smart or semi-smart tool of Lightroom comes in play. When I select color range, my cursor change to this eyedropper, and if I sample some color from the image, it will take this color and automatically create a mask of everything of this color or similar colors across the image. Of course, I don't want to select these rocks. I don't want to select these trees here in shadow. I just want to select everything that was at the top of the frame. And there is an easy way to fix that. What I need to do is to click on this mask once again. And now I can see that I have my color range selection here. So mask is in fact a grouping to other masks. Now we have just one, but if I click on subtract, I have another menu, which is exactly the same as before. And now I can pick brush, and here I want my flow and density to be 100%. And now I will start brushing and subtracting from my original selection, from what Lightroom did for me with my brush. Now I'm removing what was selected by mistake because Lightroom doesn't know the context of the image. It doesn't know what I want to select, but I'm fixing this in just few strokes of my brush here. So nothing will be selected here, like so. Okay, now it's clean. And here's my mask. I'm only looking at this foliage. Nothing else is selected. And I have 2 masks combined together, and they make up my final foliage mask. Now, when I want to change the color or saturate them, they are getting saturated more and more, but only in those selected areas. Rocks are still the same color. Everything else is the same color. I'm not changing anything but what I actually need to change. So this is where I want this to go, and maybe a little bit of a clarity. And here it is. This is our final image. This is what you can do in what, maybe half an hour. Very simple. And instead of having blue and not interesting image, we have this final result. I can even go down, turn on my effects, and have this nice frame for my image as final touch. So that's what local adjustments are. Very simple, but if you want to really shine and be excellent in doing these adjustments and do an amazing job, you just need to practice. It's a matter of doing this again, again, and again, and trying to understand what your image is about, what you want to show, what you want to highlight, or maybe what you want to hide. Because if you don't want to have something in your image popping up really, really obviously, you can just take the mask and dim it down a little bit and make it not so visible and guide your viewer through the image and show them exactly what you wanted to show. Okay, so this is the process as it is. And now I have one question. Lorraine, do we have any questions in the chat?
Anybody have any questions for Vladimir? Please feel free, if you want to ask him directly, just let me know and I can unmute your microphone, or you can type it in the chat box. Yeah, Vladimir, sometimes there's
All
a
right,
little bit of a
good.
delay.
I hope this is a good sign that nothing was really complex. Good.
You know, a
Now,
couple people told me they were using it along with you in the program, so they may be, you know,
good. This is
they
excellent. This is
experimenting.
excellent
Mhm.
because there is nothing better than just trying things yourself and practice not your view and not your memory, but actually your hand. All right. Now, a few things that will help you better work with these images before we move on to examples how else you can use these masks. First of all, when you look at these masks, at this list, you see these black boxes and you see white spots there. Basically, they show you what was selected. So the black area is what is not selected, and white area is what was selected. So white area is your red color in the mask. But even looking at these small areas, it is hard to say what those changes are. Okay, it's easy with vignette, but it's more difficult with others. So what I usually do, at the end of the processing, I click on every mask twice, on every name, and name them. So I'll call this vignette. This one will be our water. Then here will be our rock shadows. Then we have rock highlights. And we have our foliage. So now, next time, when I open this image and I want to change something, I don't have to look into each individual mask. I know exactly what I'm looking for, and I know how many adjustments I made. Moreover, if you like one particular change, so for example, you like the water, how it looks, when you select it, this mask is active now, so we have this area for the Lightroom activated, and we see our changes in the panel. So we can come back and change that. So for example, if I want the water to be more blue, I can do that by simply dragging the slider over the blue, and it will start getting a lot of blue or a little blue, depending on how deep I go. And again, since the mask is really, really soft and it's really, really thin, even if I'm pushing this temperature really hard, it's barely changing the color. And this helps me better control the density of the effect and better make final adjustments not so obvious and more subtle, which is at the end of the day more intriguing to people and they find it more pleasing. So if I like some effect and I just remember that, okay, I did that once, then maybe half of a year later or a few days later, I'm working with a different image and I have water there as well. And I think, oh, I had that image and I developed really nice pattern how I want to uh, look at this water, how I want this water to be shown on this image too. So now you can quickly go back to this image, open it, expand the masks block, and quickly find this water with all the settings. So it's like additional tip and label to quickly find what you did for the future use or reuse. So I usually keep that organized. It just like matter of few seconds, but it saves a lot of time and a lot of energy. And sometimes I find that I have duplicates. Like for example, I could have like two rock highlights or two rock shadows, and I really don't need that complexity. So I rather remove one of the masks and just do everything in one. So it's like additional level of checking if everything is fine with your image. Another thing that you might want to consider is to take snapshots. So all the changes that you do with Lightroom are not destructive to the image. So you can roll back to your previous settings, or you can change what you did in the past, like we just did with the water. We just added blue tint to all the white areas. But sometimes you reach certain milestone and you say that I like this result. If I go somewhere really, really far, it would be really hard for me to find that point. If I will go in the wrong direction, I need some marker from where I can go back and start thinking again and maybe improving the image in another way. And snapshots is a great way to do that. So from time to time, I'm taking these snapshots because it's just convenient way to keep things handy and not deviate from my development path too far and lose myself in all the changes and trying to remember where exactly I reached that fine point where I was satisfied. So for example, we have this image. So I can create a snapshot of this state and well, let's keep it as is. So I will just keep create and it will create a new adjustment. Now, even if I'll change something in my image, let's say I can even reset it completely. So it will be blue again as I was doing this in the beginning. I now can just click on the snapshot and instantly it will return all my settings back. So if somewhere along the way, I feel that this image is now in the state that will not be changed, whatever I do next will stay, will be adding on top of this change. Create a snapshot. Maybe even name it if you have certain idea how exactly this snapshot should be reflecting the context of your image. Maybe, well, the good example is that I imported that image and I instantly created first snapshot and I said imported raw file. So this is the original file. Then when I made global adjustments myself at home out of the live workshop, I said, this is where I want to go with these global adjustments. Then I tried vignette, said, okay, this is the vignette I want. Then I went to local adjustments, and these are my local adjustments that I did before. And local adjustments in frame is my final image that I did at home. And notice that this image is slightly different from what we just made during this half an hour. Look, this is my change, and this is the change that we made online. These are two very different images. And over time, you might think that you like one image better, or you don't like both of these images, but you want to improve one of them. And this is an easy way to jump between those and figure out what changes are more pleasing for you, what is matching your vision, what you remembered when you took that picture. So that's the idea behind snapshots. And I really, really encourage you to take this tool really seriously. It's really, really helping. So this is the development process. Now, let me show you a few creative ways and few smart tools of Lightroom that might be helpful when you will be developing and working with your images. First of all, let me jump over this blank screen, and here's one example. So this is a cicada that I captured last year at my backyard, and the image was really, really nice. So I applied several changes, again, really basic, and then I created several masks, and you can see that I have very basic ones. I even didn't touch the subject itself. So I just selected one shadow area and made it a little bit darker because it was really, really bright and I had no depth in this area. So I made it just a little bit darker. And I darkened corners like this one and this one and upper left shadow because it was too bright, because I had really, really bright spot of light here. And with this mask, I'm focusing people on the bug itself. So simple changes, not something that we just create, really basic. But if I want to do something else with the bug, highlight it or make it more textured, using brush will be difficult here. Even if I will use feather, these changes will still going to spill into these bright areas. And for that, Lightroom recently introduced a nice feature that is called Select Subject. When you click on it and give it a few seconds, it tries and guess what is on your image, what is your subject, and it tries to basically create this interesting mask for you, which is essentially the bug itself and maybe a little bit of the leaf. Again, we can use this mask, expand it, subtract areas that we don't want to change, like this foliage, like here, and maybe a little bit here. But overall, this is our instant selection. So instead of spending hours trying to fine-tune our mask and manually select subject, try and use this tool. Maybe Lightroom will simplify your job. Sometimes it's selecting something random, especially if you have no particular subject or it's something really abstract or complex. But in cases like that, like with people with defined subjects like still life, bugs, animals, it's doing pretty decent job, like in this example. And now what I can do, I can basically do my changes only on this subject. I can increase clarity, I can increase texture, I can make it a little bit more contrasty, I can make it a little bit more exposed so it will be a little bit brighter or even darker depending on what I want. But it is doing this change exactly on this bug, nowhere else. It is really efficient tool when it's working properly, and most of the time it does when you use it on the right subject. So keep this in mind. So you don't have to use the brush manually all the time. You can use this efficient tool. And again, without the mask, it's a little bit blurry. With the mask, it's more pronounced. And again, it's not exaggerated. The image is not ugly. It's probably just benefited from having this additional layer and this additional change. And I just follow my rule and call it the bug. So this is smart tool that was introduced just recently, maybe about 9 months ago or something like that. Now, another example. Let me turn this off and go here. I photographed this place during my fall trip to American Northwest. I'm sorry, northeast. This is, oh my God, where is that? This is Rhode Island. This is abandoned building. I was just driving at completely different location, and I suddenly saw this beautiful red color on a blue background and this abandoned store. So I saw that I'll stop there and I take a picture. And it was nice. And, the original image was very close to what I saw, but the problem was that um, it was really, really flat. Let me reset everything and you will see. So you see that it's nice, but I have no information in trees, so they're essentially black. I have no details behind the glass. I have nothing to look at in this corner. And exactly as I described, everything that is in the foreground is very, very blue. Those lines on the parking lots, they're supposed to be blue. Yes, they might have certain blue tint, but not that blue. So it was a little bit distracting, and I decided that, okay, I will try and do some adjustments. And I came up with a lot of uh, masks, more than you can even imagine. Uh, 4 different masks for 4 different areas. First of all, it is the sky. And this is especially interesting because this is the perfect subject for this selection. Um, Let me just select it once again, but now I will use this smart tool that's called Select Sky. And again, a few seconds, and it will highlight my sky. So I don't have to fine tune my edges here over trees, over the building itself. It does pretty good job selecting the sky for myself. So I don't have to bother and spend time on that. Sometimes keep in mind that it might select faint distant object like fog mountains or hills that are barely visible or melt with the horizon line because the tool is trying to guess the, I don't know, the contrast or color or something, but it's not aware of the image itself. It doesn't know where the sky ends because it has no concept of the sky, just some neural network that is working for us here. Um, so this mask is essentially a repetition of what I had here. This is another smart tool that you should use, or at least try and use when you have something like that, like open sky. And I used it to change the perception of the light. So with this mask, I just changed the tonality of the light because it was too dark on the camera, and I wanted to have it brighter exactly as it was because it was bright morning. And I changed this area a little bit because cameras are not really good with red. Every time you photograph something bright red, it's just like blob of red color with no details. So I selected the wall. And funny enough, I was selecting this wall using the select subject. So let me just show you how it works. If you have subject like this and you click on select subject, it does that selection for you, but somehow it picks up this red color in this area. So what I had to do is basically go here in my wall and deduct certain areas that I didn't want to be included into this section. So I had to combine different techniques in order to complete this relatively simple and I would say primitive image. You never guess that I put so much time and effort in developing such a simple subject. And finally, I want to show you the pavement. This tool is called linear gradient. It is exactly the same as radial. The only difference is that it's just flat. It has 2 controls, so you can increase the feather using one tool, and you can turn it one way or another. And what I used it for is to highlight the foreground. So I'm not changing the sky because I have my sky selection, but instead I selected the foreground and I did the change to the parking lot to make it not so blue, a little bit brighter, and with a little bit more texture. So it's more interesting and much more balanced with the sky itself. And finally, this is where I used my brush, and you can see that it's quite sloppy, but it's not that important here. And I selected this little patch um, because before the adjustment, it was just like black spot that was really, really distracting. Now it's part of the subject. So I have these cracks in the pavement, and they lead to these, well, I would say even like a little rocky lake or something, and the crack goes on and leaves the frame. So without that little change, without uh, this adjustment, it looks not really appealing. So you see, it's really, really dark. And with the change, I have much more textures in here. So this is the change. And finally, one more thing that you can do with local adjustments, and this is playing with colors. You probably saw these images when you have everything black and white and only one subject selected and shown in color. And this is what you can easily do with masks. What you need to do is to go to masks and select your subject in whatever way you want. You can do this with um, select subject, or you can do this with brush, or you can try and pick color range if you want to highlight certain color. And then once you do this, let me show you what you can do to select everything but this object. So let me turn off these masks for a second. And now when I create new mask and select, let's try select subject. Here's our subject. It is selected. Now what I need to do, I need to duplicate this mask. It will create a copy. And now when this copy is selected, I will click on invert and it will select everything else. Now what I can do, I can simply take this everything else and remove the saturation, pull it down and remove the color. And on the mask that is highlighting my subject, I can increase the saturation to 100%, make it brighter, change the contrast if needed, and here it is. So in just few simple changes, you can create image that is not realistic, but quite creative. And I think we're at the end of our hour. Rain, are there any questions?
Any questions? A few people asked me if there's going to be a recording, and there is going to be a recording. It will be ready about the beginning of next week and will be on the library's YouTube page. One question came in. Why did you need to create a copy of the mask?
Um, for this, if we're talking about this particular image, I created copy of the mask because I selected one subject that will be, I will say, deep red. And note that this mask is having the saturation really, really high. So I'm increasing the saturation on the building because it was not that saturated when I took the photograph. And I created a copy of this mask and inverted it. So if I remove the invert, it will be exactly the same as before. But when I invert the mask and select everything else, note that my saturation is minus 100%. So I'm decreasing the saturation, everything else, essentially making the picture black and white. If I take this slider and push it all the way back, I will have colors in my foreground, in my background, everywhere, but not in the selection on the different mask. So this is my black and white image. And the second mask, black and white. And the first mask is only for the building that is exaggerating the color that was not there in the beginning.
Okay.
Okay?
Okay. Doesn't matter the order in which the masks and adjustments are done. Are there times when one needs to be higher or lower than the other in the list?
They don't have to be in any particular order because they are stacked on top of each other. So if you put some mask and let's say increase the exposure one stop, so you make the thing a little bit brighter, and then you put another mask on top of it and make things a little bit darker, you will get essentially to the point where you started. And this is why I said that when you name your layers and when you go over your masks and do this housekeeping, you sometimes may discover that you have two masks doing the same job. They are repeating themselves, or you're trying to create new mask on top of an old one, and instead of having two, you might, well, delete one and combine your changes in one single mask. So the matter is not that important. They just stack on each other and they are aggregated into one single result.
Okay. What are the best ways you've learned more about photo editing? Any courses or social media groups or in-person groups you'd recommend?
Uh, I would say that the best way to learn photography is to start taking pictures and trying to learn about what you don't like about them and what you would like to fix. And then start asking questions in Google and check YouTube videos. YouTube is a great source for different techniques and different things that you can do with your photos. And especially if you know that you have particular problem, it's much easier to spell this question in Google or write in YouTube search and find answers there. Books are a great source when you need some theory, when you need to learn about the compositions, when you need to learn about light, when you need to learn about how to use cameras and how to research locations. But in terms of software and how to develop uh, photographs, it's probably the best to stick to online resources because books cannot keep up with evolution of the software. Well, and even videos, core concepts like masks, they are essentially the same. Once you learn them, once you understand how they work, it's just a matter of maybe 15, 20 minutes to adjust a new update in the Lightroom or any other software. You just learn few new buttons and that's it. So stick to online resources and keep taking pictures. This is the best way to be more critical to your work and find solutions to those step by step.
I will tell you that the library has done a number of photography programs. Most of them have been recorded. So if you go to our YouTube page, you can find those. And if there's a particular subject you're interested in and want Vladimir to come back and talk to you, just let me know. I'll type my email address in here and feel free to reach out and tell me something you'd like to learn about. One of the good things about a library program versus a YouTube is that you can actually talk to the photographer and ask questions. But if you like videos, I can tell you also that the library does subscribe to LinkedIn Learning. So if you go on our database page, you can go on there and look for some photography programs.
I will add that library is absolutely critical and important source of books on photography subject, not from the technical perspective and not on developing photographs and not on the software, but on the subject itself. Take books from photographers, read about their journeys, what they photographed, how they did that, and just enjoy pictures. because learning from masters, well, I would not be shy about saying that I owe a lot to big books and masters, and I picked all the books in our local libraries that I could have my hand on and read all of them because it's such an amazing subject, and you just learn how to take better pictures. Like, for example, this one that we have on the screen right now. If you spend like few seconds online looking at someone's great photos on Facebook or Instagram, you just flip them and go on, and screens are too small. When you look at the book, you hold it in your hand for minutes, at least for minutes, and you enjoy these pictures and you start seeing much more than you would see on your screen.
I agree with that, Vladimir. And someone just wrote in and said she just took out a book on photography of critters in the national parks. Jennifer, I want you to know we're having a in-person photography program on May 25th at Gum Spring, and it's photographing wildlife and also outdoor photography if you're interested. So that should be pretty cool. And anything else? Vladimir, thank you so much for your time. You
My
gave
pleasure.
everybody
Thank you
so
for having
many
me.
great points, and most of the people did ask if there's going to be a recording. So I think there's a lot of information here, and it really benefits. It's beneficial to go back and listen to it again.
All right. Thank you.
So,
Have a great
all
evening.
right. Thank you so much, Vladimir. Thank you all for joining us. Bye bye.